A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari and I hope that you all must be doing fine. So let's start with today's analysis, which is going to be for 2nd of March 2023. So we again see GST collections, they crossed rupees 1.49 lakh crore rupees and cess inflows also hit a record. So here you should be clear with the meaning of cess, that whatever amount is collected through cess, how are they used and for what all purposes they are used. So the trend is, we can say, almost an upward trend when we talk about the GST collection. So this is one of the positive indicators when we talk about the functioning and the performance of our economy. Then here, FCRA license of a think tank has been suspended. So you need to be aware about this act. Also, what are the provisions and rules under it? And we are again seeing an impact of inflation, that is domestic LPG cylinder prices, they have been hiked by rupees 50. So inflation is still a concern for us. And India asked G20 to extradite the economic offenders past. So here you need to be aware about the details regarding the economic offenders law that we have in India. And New Delhi is in favor of strengthening of the mechanisms for speedy confiscation of proceeds of crime both at home and abroad, and which will force the offenders to return to their home countries. So there was first anti-corruption working group meeting in Gurugram, and basically main topic was regarding economic offenders and their fast extradition. So economic offenses, they have been a problem faced by many countries, especially when the offenders they flee from the jurisdiction of the country. So India has put in place a specialized legislation in this regard. So we have the Fugitive Economic Offenders Act of 2018, and the term fugitive economic offender, it is defined under this law as an individual against whom a warrant of arrest in relation to scheduled offense has been issued by any court in India and who has left the country to avoid criminal prosecution. So this is the definition of a fugitive economic offender. And the person has fled abroad and he or she refuses to return to face the criminal prosecution. So Carnatic vocalist Neela Ram Gopal passes away, and she was a noted Carnatic vocalist and teacher. And she hailed from Tamil Nadu, and she had shifted to Bengaluru after her marriage over 6 decades. And after shifting to Bengaluru, she learned the Kannada and made it a point to sing and teach Kannada kritis to her students. And she widely sang the Dasara Padas too, and she has also released several albums, including the Ram Upasana, Narayan Eniro, and Tamiz Inbam. While she was well known as a vocalist in the concert circuit, she was also a highly respected teacher who trained over 700 students. And she was one of the first to open herself up to Skype classes in Bengaluru, and as a result, has students even across the world also. Then Idukki has water for only 2 months of power generation, and water levels in major hydel dams, including Idukki in Kerala, they have dipped. So somewhere we are like in some places we are witnessing the situation of floods. Somewhere we have dry situation. We do not have adequate amount of water. So that these all are impacts of climate change that we are seeing. So when the higher judiciary is invariably drawn into politics, but when it comes to the collegium, it is better to include the union law minister in the body. This is what the author of this article feels. So that justice is blind is part of the myth system, and a judge is a lawyer who is a politician who has a friend. And in India, the episode of the Collegium's recommendation of Justice L. Victoria Gori's name and her appointment to the Madras High Court within weeks has revived the debate on judicial appointments as well. And we have been already looked like we have already talked about this whole issue. So a two-judge bench which made a distinction between the eligibility and the suitability said that the material on her alleged hate speeches was before the collegium. So basically the Supreme Court said that we cannot judge a person's suitability when it comes to appointing a person as a judge. And the Supreme Court of India is a political court in the sense that it is the final arbiter of the political disputes. And accordingly, the political and the ideological positions of judges may influence their judgments, at least on the contentious political questions. So, this concern about the ideological or the political leanings of the judges is perfectly justified. And it is a center of political power because it can influence the agenda of even political actions, control over which is what power politics is in reality all about. And the court is routinely drawn into the politics of the establishment as well as the politics of opposition. In other words, whether justices of the court like it or not, understand it or not, care about it or not, the plain fact remains that the court can be used for purely party political ends in certain situations which are beyond the control of the court also. So, evidence as judgments and appointments. So, we'll be looking into some examples of case studies. So any number of examples can be cited to substantiate this argument. So when we look into the Hindutva judgment of 1996, it was a big boost and it legitimized the BJP's ideological position also. So too in the ADM Jabalpur case of 1976 to the Indira Gandhi government. And then we had the SR Bommai of 1994, which had upheld the dismissal of the BJP governments in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Himachal Pradesh after the demolition of the Babri Masjid on the ground of secularism as the basic structure. It was a big victory for the Congress. Then we had the Rafale verdict in 2018, which came before the general elections in 2019, was a big political boost for the Modi government. And then the final judgment in the Ayodhya case of 2019, it too had huge political significance. So there have been certain cases which have political impacts and which prove to be politically very important and significant for certain political parties. So governments do take into account the ideological leanings of the judges, and like we saw on 12th of May 1973 in a speech in Parliament, Mrs. Gandhi's cabinet colleague, that is Mr. Kumar Mangalam, he audaciously defended the appointment of the Chief Justice of India, basically Justice A.N. Ray, who had superseded three senior most judges back then. And he said that we had to take into account what was a judge's basic outlook on life. Was it not right to take all these aspects into consideration? So, this thing is like always mentioned. Appointment of CGI A.N. Ray back then. And obviously, every government would want judges who are likely to decide the cases in its favor. And this was very much the norm even under the Congress rule. So, Justice M.H. Beg, for instance, he was appointed on the directions of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, overruling CJI Sikri's opposition. And then Justice D.G. Palekar was appointed because of his close proximity with then Law Minister H.R. Gokhale. So, such have been appointments in history, and still our judiciary is still independent. So fortunately and strangely, many government appointed judges were able to assert their independence, barring a few exceptions, and they have been quite impressive. So some even struck down the major decisions taken by the Jawaharlal Nehru and the Indira Gandhi governments. So the Champakam Durai Rajan case, which is a very famous and a very important case of 1951, when basically it was regarding the reservation policy of Madras, it was struck down by majority of 7-0. And then in Golaknath case of 1967, the Supreme Court, it denied the parliament the power to amend the constitution and held the fundamental rights to be the primordial rights necessary for the development of the human personality. And obviously, we know about the case of Nanda Bharati judgment of 1973. The basic structure theory was propounded to restrict and limit the parliament's power to amend the constitution. And obviously, who can forget about the Raj Narayan case of 1975, where Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha had struck down the Prime Minister's election itself. So even during the emergency, as many as 9 high courts had upheld the right to habeas corpus against the illegal detention, and such strong judgments are rarely delivered today. So even in the pre-collegium days, the governments, they generally used to go by the CJI's recommendations, and of the 547 appointments made between 1983 to 1993, the CJI's views, they were ignored only in 7 of such instances. Finally, who can assert that the collegium is entirely independent and always it recommends ideologically neutral judges? Like, who can assert this with 100% surety? So we are coming to today's debate, which has been going around the collegium system and whether there should be a government representative in the collegium system or not. So firstly, who can assert that collegium system is entirely independent and always recommends ideologically neutral judges? Then the collegium system has not drastically improved the situation, as the government continues to have the final word in the judicial appointments. And since the government does have a veto power in practice, in spite of the memorandum of procedure laying down that the government would be bound to appoint a judge if his or her name is reiterated by the collegium, it is better to include the union law minister in the collegium so that his views are heard and his reservations discussed threadbare. So let his views too become a part of the minutes, and if the other 5 judges, that is the collegium, they are not convinced, decisions can be made by the majority, and the government, being party to the deliberations and recommendations, would have to accept the collegium's recommendations also. So the goal should be to end the supersession, cherry picking of the judges, and making process much more transparent. So yesterday, we saw that Supreme Court had said that the governors and the chief ministers, they should respect the constitutional boundaries and work in a mature manner. So constitutional functionaries, they cannot let rancor prevail over propriety, and this is the substance and import of the Supreme Court's advice to the governor and the Chief Justice of Punjab that they should, Chief Minister of Punjab, that they should display mature statesmanship in handling their differences. And Governor of Punjab, he was like indeed way out of line when he indicated that he would act on the cabinet advice to convene the budget session of the Punjab Assembly only after he obtained the legal advice on the Chief Minister's response to some of his earlier queries. And this basically forced the political party and the government to approach the court against the apparent refusal to call the assembly session in the state. So talking about Article 174 of the Constitution, it is obviously now well known, and even though it says that the governor shall summon the House from time to time to meet at such a time and place as he thinks fit, a constitution bench had in the Nabam Rabia judgment of 2016 ruled that the governor can summon, prorogue, and dissolve the House only on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So it is hardly likely that basically the current governor of Punjab is unaware of this, but he must have taken such a position because of the state of relations between Raj Bhavan and the Chief Minister's office. And it is highly unfortunate that such instances of one-upmanship between governors and chief ministers, they are becoming much more frequent in various states. So both should be mindful of their constitutional boundaries. Some governors, they seem to believe that they can stretch their discretion to areas not specifically mentioned in the constitution also. And the more germane reason for this is that incumbents in the Raj Bhavan, they tend to take their role as the eyes and the ears of the union government too literally, and they often get into the political domain as well. So while they can indeed guide, caution, or advise, they sometimes play the role of commentator, critique, and even the opposition. So this does not augur well for the constitutional governance. So we've been talking about that we'll be obviously witnessing heat waves, and we have started seeing the impacts also, and that would be having a negative impact on our cultivation, on our production when we talk about the food grains. So even health systems should be responsive to the challenges from heat waves. So on in like February 2023, the IMD recently said that it had been the warmest since basically February 2023 had been the warmest since 1901, with the average maximum temperature at nearly almost we can say 29.5 degrees Celsius or 30 degrees Celsius, while February, considered spring and a winter month by the IMD, usually post temperatures in the lows of 20 degrees, but it has been, we can say, almost higher by 10 degrees Celsius. And obviously, searing temperatures over the years, they have impacted the yield of wheat. And India produced around 106 million tons of wheat in 2021-22 crop season, less than 100 and we can say 9.6 million tons in the previous season, which was due to hotter than usual March that impacted the crop during its growth phase. And talking about monsoon and then El Nino and La Nina. So, three of the last 4 years, they saw above normal rainfall in India, primarily due to La Nina, or we can say cooler than usual temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. So, while this is expected to subside now, whether it will actually swing to an El Nino and draw moisture away from India's coast remains to be seen. And the interplay between the local weather and the climate is complex. And while it is tempting to blame rising heat wave intensity as climate change, the science continues to be uncertain. So, this should be a wake up call to buttress the public health systems and make them more responsive to the challenges from the rising temperature. So, several states they have action plans and early warning initiatives being inadequate outreach, particularly in rural India. So, along with promoting newer crop varieties that mature early, there should be greater stress on aiding the farmers to tweak soil and water management practices to adapt to all these changes. So, whenever we are talking about climate change mitigation, we are also talking about adaptation aspect. So India not on target in many women-related development goals. So which are they? So goal to reduce anemia among women, especially among those who are pregnant, is where India lags the most. And also when we talk about undernutrition, that is also a very big problem in India. So missing the target. So the charts based they are sourced from article title Progress on Sustainable Development Goal Indicators in 707 districts of India. And this is basically based on the National Family Health Service 2016 and 2021. So this chart one is showing the distribution of districts in India based on their SDG indicator status. So you can see that the blue one, basically light blue one, is showing the districts which are on target. So there are very less number of districts which are on target when we talk about anemia in women. And off target, there are many, this dark blue and little dirty blue color. So you can see that as we go down, the on target districts, they are increasing in their number, but major concern for us are the districts which are off target. So basically that includes relating to the anemia, then anemia in the non-pregnant women, access to basic services, then health insurance regarding women, tobacco use in men, wasting and overweight, then own mobile phone in women. Basically they do not have, there are very less number of districts where a woman is owning a mobile phone. Then modern contraceptive use, we are lacking in health insurance in men, we are lacking child marriage of girl child below the age of 18 years, we are lacking. Then partner violence, physical violence, we're again lacking here. Partner violence, physical or sexual assault is again, we are lacking on this target. Clean fuel for cooking, then teenage pregnancy, stunting, hand washing facilities. And likewise, you can go ahead and read. So understanding the Windsor framework. So what is the Northern Ireland's protocol and how did it lead to disruptions in the trade between the Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom? And what is the source of tension between the Unionists and the Republicans of Northern Ireland? Will the new framework come into effect immediately or not? So a new deal to cool off the trade disruptions between these two regions, and you can also understand the geography through this map. So on 27th of February, the United Kingdom and the European Union, they struck a landmark agreement, which is titled the Windsor Framework, to replace the contentious Northern Ireland Protocol and end a bitter post-Brexit trade disputes. So if we try to understand the geography and the location, so this is basically Ireland, part of European Union. This is Northern Ireland. Here we have Wales. This is United Kingdom. This is basically, this part is called England, and this is Wales. This is Scotland. This is Ireland. So United Kingdom has a lot of territories as a member. So England is one of them. And talking about Northern Ireland, so the green lane basically for UK goods. So traders to complete single certificate per truck rather than multiple forms per load. So basically they have made the process much more easier. And talking about Ireland, so European Union destined goods go via the red lane with full customs procedures, and the European Court of Justice will continue to be the final arbiter on matters of European Union law affecting Northern Ireland. So you can like read, but this is not of much importance, but we should be just aware about it and like what is going on at the global level. So combining the social welfare and capital markets through the social stock exchange, and how does basically it will be functioning, how will the NPOs and FPOs raise funds through this exchange? So 22nd February, the National Stock Exchange of India received the final approval for the Securities and the Exchange Board of India to set up this social stock exchange. So what is actually a social stock exchange? It would function as a separate segment within the existing stock exchange, and it will help the social enterprises raise funds from the public through its mechanism. It would serve as a medium for the enterprises to seek finance for the social initiatives, acquire visibility, and provide increased transparency about the fund mobilization and utilization at the same time. Retail investors, even they can also invest in securities which are being offered by for-profit social enterprises under the main board. And in all other cases, only institutional investors and non-institutional investors, they can invest in securities issued by these social enterprises. So talking about the eligibility, so any non-profit organization or for-profit social enterprise that establishes the primacy of social intent, they would be recognized as a social enterprise, which will make it eligible to be registered or listed on the social stock exchange. So the 17 plausible criteria as listed under the regulation of 292E of SEBI's ICDR regulations of 2018, they entail that enterprises, they must be serving to eradicate hunger, like either hunger, poverty, malnutrition, or inequality. They should be promoting education, employability, equality, empowerment of women, and then LGBTQIA plus communities. They should be working towards environmental sustainability, protection of national heritage and art, or bridging the digital divide, among other things. So these can be the categories where the social enterprises, they should be working, and at least 67% of their activities must be directed towards attaining the stated objective. Then corporate foundations, political and religious organizations or activities, professional or trade associations, infrastructure and housing companies would not be identified as a social enterprise. So this is a very important point for you to remember. And apart from that, so how do the FPOs, they raise money? So for-profit enterprises, they need not register with the social stock exchanges before it raises funds through them. So however, it must comply with all the provisions of the ICDR regulations when raising through the SSE. So it can raise money through issue of equity shares on the main board, SME platform, or innovators growth platform, the stock exchange, or issuing equity shares to an alternative investment fund, including the social impact fund or the issue of debt instruments. And talking about how the non-profit organizations raise money, so they may either raise it through issuance of the zero coupon, zero principal instruments from the private placements or the public issue, or donations from the mutual funds. So SEBI had earlier recognized that these non-profit organizations, by their very nature, they have primacy of social impact. They are like non-revenue generating. So thus, there was a need to provide NPOs a direct access to securities market for raising the funds. And what disclosures are needed to be made. So SEBI's regulations, they state that a social enterprise that should submit an annual impact report in a prescribed format. So the report must be audited by a social audit firm and has to be submitted within 90 days from the end of the financial year. So what's in a name? The journey from Aurangabad to Sambhaji Nagar. Nursery of history, it has been ruled by the eccentric Muhammad bin Tughlaq of the Delhi Sultanate, Mughals, and even Marathas, and it is also a home to the famous Ajanta Ellora caves, which are now a UNESCO heritage site. So, a little over 1,000 kilometers from the Taj Mahal in Agra rests a son of Mumtaz Mahal in Aurangabad, and not quite a mother's darling, but he failed to find his father's love too, losing out to his brother Dara Shukho. And not that he did much to earn it, as the events from 1658 to 1666 prove when Shah Jahan was imprisoned at Agra. Actually, the man who lies buried in Kuldabad was his own man doing his own thing his own way. So, so the choice of the new name is interesting. So Sambhaji was Shivaji's son who was captured by the Mughal forces in 1689, and in his tussle with the emperor, he came out second best. So Aurangzeb ordered Sambhaji, who had spent years fighting the Mughal state along with his Brahmin advisor Kavi Kalash, to be publicly humiliated, and he then had like Sambhaji's eyes stabbed out with nails, and in one historian's poetic words, his shoulders were lightened of the load of his head also. So Aurangabad, it also hosts well-known Shivaji Museum, which is an ode to the genius of the man who took on the mighty of the Mughal emperor with limited resources and astounding success. And Aurangabad's history also incorporates the Sultanate, Mughals, and the Marathas and goes back further in time. So it is home to the famous Ajanta-Ellora caves, and the former being 30 rocket Buddhist monuments from the 2nd century BC, and the later being the largest rocket Hindu temple. It's 100 caves dating back to the Rashtrakuta and the Yadav dynasties. And Ajanta-Ellora caves, they are UNESCO World Heritage Sites and turned the notion of the region being a Mughal Maratha centerpiece on its head. And indeed, Aurangabad or Sambhaji Nagar is a nursery of history. So, very important place from the perspective of history. So, talking about S400, so all 5 of them we are expecting to for them to get delivered by early 2024. So basically these are Russian S-400 anti-aircraft missile launching systems. You can see them in the picture also. So insurance, reinsurance, and delayed payments, they remain major stumbling blocks in defense deals with Russia. And after it was shut out of the global SWIFT system, India, Russia, they agreed to conduct the payments through the rupee ruble arrangement. And obviously here we have discussed very important thing, that is the watchdog accounts. So these are the issues. And so UAPA Arms Act sections, they have been added to Haryana terror case. So the National Investigation Agency has filed a supplementary charge sheet against 3 alleged associates of the Babbar Khalsa International linked terrorist Harvinder Singh Sandhu pertaining to the seizure of the improvised explosive devices, arms and ammunition in the Haryana's Madhuban last May. So Prime Minister pitches for faster and planned urbanization. And he said that the two main aspects of the urban development in India were the development of new cities and modernization of the old urban systems. And he lamented that few planned cities had been built in the economy since independence. So it should be done in a planned and scientific manner with proper assessment. And he said that India was developing at a rapid pace and several new cities were going to be essential for the future. So anti-defection law applies even if a faction splits from a party. And here we have the 10th schedule of the Constitution, which talks about anti-defection. So this law applies even if a faction splits from a party. So anti-defection law applies even if the political party and it manages to cobble up a majority within the party itself. So the Supreme Court observed this in a hearing in the political dispute which is going on between two Maharashtra factions, and the split does not postulate that people who are party to the split they leave the party. So splitting of a political party does not mean that they are like no longer a member of that particular faction. And the 10th schedule, that is the anti-defection law, also operates when a group of persons, whether minority or majority, they claim they belong to the same party. So even this thing is applicable. So whether a faction was the majority or minority makes no difference under the 10th schedule. And so that was the thing. And here again, we have the Nabam Ramya judgment, which is important, that if the removal proceedings against a speaker of the assembly, they have been initiated and they are going on. So that person, the speaker, cannot basically take decisions regarding the anti-defection cases which are pending against him. So now when we talk about G20 meeting, we have been now trying to push for a consensus because we are expecting that right now we are seeing the situation is such and it is difficult for all the countries to come on same page. So negotiators, they continue talks on breaking the impasse between Russia, China combined, and then we have G7 led countries over jointly approved document at the foreign ministers meet. So the former had objected to references to war at Bangalore event. So we are seeing that even in G20 meetings, Russia and China, they have combined, they have come together, and other group has been formed by the G7 countries. So India, Russia are consistent opponents of illegitimate unilateral sanctions, and this is coming from the Russia's foreign minister. So he even recollected the correspondence between Leo Tolstoy and Mahatma Gandhi and called for a polycentric world order. So India and Russia are united by a firm commitment to building a more just and democratic polycentric world order. Moscow and New Delhi, they are consistent opponents of such neo-colonial practices as illegitimate unilateral sanctions, threats, blackmail, and other types of pressure on the sovereign states. So we consistently stand for respect for the cultural and civilizational diversity of the modern world, for the inalienable right of peoples to independently determine their own paths of development. And obviously, we support multipolar system of relations between the states. So Press Council of India, it warns against the publication of paid news by the print media. So stating that the newspapers, they should not misconstrue or misquote the statements given by any leader. The council said that the statements quoted in editorials, they should project the true spirit of what was being tried to be conveyed by them. In columns of news items which largely indicate names of voters can cast bases on caste basis and supporters of the candidate of particular political party, such as tenor and the manner of presentation of news, established the reports to be the paid news. So political news published in competing newspapers with similar content strongly suggest such reports to be the paid news. So talking about Gift City, firstly, you should be aware about that in which state it is located. So it is there in Gujarat. So two Australian public universities, they are going to establish their campuses in the Gift City. So we were like few days back, we were talking about that foreign universities, specifically in higher education. So we do not have any such foreign universities having their campuses in India. So firstly, now we are seeing that the two Australian public universities are going to be set up in Gujarat. So two Australian government universities, which is the Deakin University and the University of Wollongong, they will be the first foreign education institutions to be set up there, to set up their campuses in Gujarat, that is in the Gift City. And this is a welcome development. So this is a step forward, and India is committed to become a developed country in the next 25 years, that is by 2047. And to achieve that status, we have to give focus on the education sector also. So 12 years into the future, under the National Education Policy 2020 by 2020, 35, 50% of Indians would be in vocational or higher education, and over the next 10 years, something like 2 or 3 million Australians will go to a university. But in India, in the next 10 years, 38 million or 39 million will do so. So basically, India is changing, and we're expecting a vibrant journey ahead. So Australia, India will have to focus even on economic ties also. So political and strategic ties between India and Australia have made great strides in the recent past. And the next steps in the bilateral relations will have to focus on the economic cooperation. So as per the ADR report, BJP had the highest income in 2021-22 and Trinamool saw the biggest jump. So party funding, in this context, you need to be knowing about the electoral bonds, how do they work, when are they issued, so all of that, and looking at the top 6 national parties in terms of the declared incomes in 2021-22 as against their expenditure. So BJP, you can see blue color is showing their total declared income, red one is their declared expenditure. Apart from that, you can have a look at other political parties also. So scheduled tribes panel requisitions FRA action reports from the top court. So title rights have been issued against just 50% of the claims over the forest land made under the FRA as of June 2022. So in the middle of a face-off with the Environment Ministry over the new forest conservation rules of 2022, potentially diluting the Forest Rights Act of 2006. The National Commission for Scheduled Tribes has now secured FRA implementation reports of all the states and the union territories by invoking its constitutional powers to approach the Supreme Court directly. So there are like very important things for us to know from this thing. So we should be knowing about the Forest Conservation Rules of 2022 and then about the Forest Rights Act and the composition and the structure of the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. And obviously, what constitutional powers do they have? So the commission on 3rd Feb, they wrote to the Supreme Court registrar invoking their powers under Clause 8D of Article 338A to seek all materials filed before the court in connection with a batch of petitions challenging the constitutionality of the Forest Rights Act. And even the top court, it ordered that the documents be supplied to this commission. So sources in the commission said it was looking to review the overall implementation of this act at the ground level and examine the rejection of titles and encroachments on the forest land. It will propose recommendations to further secure the rights of the tribes people under its constitutional mandate. Coming to the world page. So China and Belarus presidents, they called for a Ukraine ceasefire and talks over this whole issue in war. So obviously talks are the only way through to which this thing can be ended. So Ukraine forces, they may pull out of the Pamukht region. So this has been in news from many days. And when we talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, so this region, the Bamukht region is in, right now it is the main focus. So the Ukraine military basically the Ukraine military, it might decide to pull the troops back from this key stronghold of the Bamukh region, and it might be possible that obviously Russia would be having a control over this. So coming to the business page, so in February, the PMI signals steady expansion in the manufacturing. So a positive development, and job growth, it faltered, but the business confidence improved, and S&P Global India Manufacturing Purchasing Managers survey shows input cost surged at fastest pace. So even the input costs are like increasing. So we are again seeing the impact of inflation even in the manufacturing sector. So manufacturing expansion stayed the course last month and it eased marginally to 55.3 level. And electronic components, energy, foodstuff, metals, and textiles, they pushed up the input cost, Overall output charges they rose at the slowest rate in the 3 months, and business confidence improved in Feb, with firms expecting the demand strength and new product releases. So again, we can say there is mixed signals. Somewhere we are much more confident, but again, at the same time, we're also witnessing the input cost increasing. Even the petrol and diesel they surged in February after the winter lull. So India's fuel demand witnessed the sharpest rebound in February as the petrol and the diesel consumption rose by double digits after a winter lull, and petrol sales of the state-owned fuel retailers jumped by 12%. So India's jobless rate rose to 7.45% in February, as per the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. So India's unemployment rate rose to 7.45% in Feb from the level of 7.14% in the previous month, and the urban unemployment rate declined. The rural unemployment rate rose. So that was the trend witnessed, and outlook for the banking sector remains stable. So Moody Investors Service said that the banking sector outlook remains stable and is supported by the economic growth and the improved financials. So while we expect the country's real GDP growth to moderate in the fiscal year ending March 2024, India's underlying growth potential is fundamentally strong, which will support the banks, also the credit growth and the asset quality. So why is the auto industry split on the free trade deal? So we'll be looking into their concerns. So we'll be seeing that obviously. So the free trade agreements with Japan and South Korea, they have cost India billions, and with South Korean automakers importing indiscriminately into India. So that is one thing in short. So how do these FTAs they impact the auto sector in India? So India is definitely world's third largest auto market, and these FTAs which remove or they lower the import duties for the Indian made vehicles, they can offer access to new markets for the Indian automakers. So this is one positive thing how the auto industry can benefit through these FTAs. But FTAs they also aid the technology transfers, and they are a positive for the auto components trade also. However, the reduction in duties on the completely built units, that is fully built vehicles coming into India, that can impact the local manufacturing, as global manufacturers they get the opportunity to import the vehicles at the competitive prices into India. So this can potentially slow down the future investment in localization. So this is the concern, that reduction in the duties when we are importing fully built vehicles is a cause of concern, because that would be then again impacting the local manufacturing and the future investments in the auto industry sector. So what about the UK and European Union? So these members, they are manufacturing states, and they have a large base of the automakers who have a market in India. So for instance, UK is home to high-end automakers like Rolls-Royce, while Japanese original equipment manufacturers such as Toyota and Nissan, they also have a significant manufacturing presence there. So reducing the import duties on the fully built cars could impact their manufacturing plans in India. Thirdly, are the FTAs with Australia and UAE, they are better for India or not? So these were like recently signed with the two countries. So UAE and Australia, they are markets for Indian car exports. And does these domestic OEMs, they can benefit from the reduced tariffs for the CBU exports? So FTAs, they can potentially give them greater access to these markets and at a far lower cost than if they had to set up the manufacturing in these countries. So additionally, auto companies based in these two nations, they do not compete with India's domestic industry. So we're not expecting much. And has the competition strengthened in the auto sector or not? So the liberalization policy of the 1990s, it drove in the foreign investment and technology, but it also exposed the automakers to the competition at the same time. And however, the influx of the multinational OEMs that resulted in manufacturers becoming more efficient and competitive, which in turn increased the size of the market. So the free trade policy also led to the growth of the auto component industry, resulting in cost efficiencies for the domestic manufacturing. So where do the automakers stand in the future FTA? So India and UK, they have had several rounds of talks on potential FTA, and the country has also resumed the FTA discussions even with the European Union. So for India's side, to give the automakers from these regions access by way of these CBUs at a time the industry is in a period of transition to the electric vehicles, that could be detrimental to the investments domestic players they are making to prepare for these transitions. And that's how basically these are some of the concerns related to the auto industry and the free trade agreements. Coming to Financial Express. So FPIs, that is foreign portfolio investors, they see red as SEBI steps up the disclosures. So we can say the norms have been made much more tighter and stricter. So that would be a concern for the foreign portfolio investors making investments into India. So new investors reluctant to give such details on look-through basis. So they do not want to disclose as what is being demanded by SEBI. So that would be impacting even the FPI inflows into India. So SEBI asked the custodians for the beneficial ownership details of the FPIs and circulars list of 10 to 15 entities to ascertain whether they are investment managers or the fund administrators of the specific FPIs. And SEBI also asked for the details of the senior managing officials of the FPIs on a look-through basis for the fresh registrations. So then when we look at the number of FPIs registrations in India, so it stands at 11,018. Equity assets of the top 5 FPI regions investing in India, it stands at rupees 31.7 trillion. And net equity FPI flows in 2023, it stands at 38,789 crore rupees as of now. So Bill Gates says that India can be the innovation hub to address the global challenges. So in case of innovation, so 25 weeks of the COVID, it destroyed 25 years of progress in health. And the first 25 weeks of the COVID pandemic destroyed 25 years of progress in global health. And 3 years later, most countries' health system, they are still not completely back on track. So it also catalyzed a wave of health innovation in India at the same time. So with its record of vaccine development that we saw, the digital public infrastructure platforms, that is CoWIN platform majorly, and so India has the potential to develop into a hub of the innovation and ingenuity to herald a new era of global partnership which can overcome the world's greatest challenges, and underlining the power of innovation to bridge the divides and the role of India in the big global innovation boom. He said that when I was at Microsoft, we chose to put a development center here in 1998. And we did that because we knew India was going to play a major role in the global innovation ecosystem. So he says that India can develop high quality yet cost effective innovations and drive their rapid adoption. And vaccines are a prime example of that. And manufacturing PMI slips to 4-month low. So manufacturing sector grew at the slowest pace in the 4 months in February, but it remained relatively strong due to buoyant domestic demand. So the strong domestic demand, we can say, is one of the positive factors that is contributing to our economic growth as of now. And super rich, they stay tight-fisted on charity. So average contribution by wealth, when we try to understand that, the red one is for India, blue is China, light blue is UK, green is US. So obviously in US, it is always one of the highest. when it comes to charity. So India is at a very lower level. So urban planning will determine the fate of our cities in Amrit Kal, and it is only well-planned cities that will determine the fate of India. When planning is better, our cities will become climate resilient and water secure. So, Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog says that evidence is suggesting that private sector is ready for the capital expenditure. So, the larger point is that the investment climate is definitely better if the expectation is of low and stable inflation, and this is also a guarantee of a more stable rupee dollar exchange rate. So right now, when we talk about the future prospects, so they appear to be like positive as of now. But again, even when we are talking about the capital expenditure and the investment by the private sector, so again, here the major concern is the high inflation that we are witnessing right now. So the chief economic advisor says that we need a fair comparison, and shallower recovery argument does not make sense. So data revision of the past years behind the dip in Q3 manufacturing. So a day after the National Statistical Office it released third quarter GDP figures, which showed that growth was slower than anticipated. So the chief economic advisor said that data revision of prior years has made the quarterly estimates much seem lower, and the argument that the recovery has become shallower does not make sense, since one is not making a fair comparison over here, and there is much misunderstanding of the data released on the GDP for the third quarter, because it came with revisions to the data of the previous 3 years. So even the data of the previous 3 years was revised, and on that comparison, when we see and have a look at the figures, so it turned out to be lower for the third quarter of the current financial year. So even though one is comparing consumption to consumption, one is comparing the cumulative base effect of the first revision to the second revision and the third revision, all of which now inflate the base period data and depress the growth rate for 2022-23. So really one is like comparing apples to oranges. So that's what he has to say on this. Are digital technology not confined only to the big firms? So Bill Gates says that India will be the cheapest 5G market in the world. So India's uniqueness in paving way for a resilient digital economy lies in the fact that its digital technologies, they are not centered in the hands of a few big tech companies, but based on the openness along with the public-private partnership models. So we need to ensure growth with the social good, and not just from the perspective of making just higher amounts of profits. So no tolerance for terrorism. India believes that the world must resolutely display zero tolerance. After all, terrorism is the most indefensible violation of human rights and has no justification in any circumstances. So its perpetrators must therefore always be held accountable. So obviously we know and we are expecting that again in the upcoming MPC meeting, that is the Monetary Policy Committee's meeting, we are again expecting a rate hike. So this cycle is likely, like it has not ended yet, because right now even the inflation is a concern for us. So that is the thing regarding that. Taking up the Indian Express now. So we have already discussed this thing, GDP thing, and we've talked about what Bill Gates has to say. So directly jumping on to the editorial page. So in explain, let's see what do we have. So talking about the right against self-incrimination and how does it works. So this is in relation to the Manish Sisodia's arrest. So Supreme Court on Tuesday refused to hear a plea by the Delhi's Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia seeking bail in the excise policy case after a Delhi court on Monday remanded him in CBI custody till 4th of March. So Supreme Court disapproved the Sisodia approaching it directly under Article 32 of the Constitution when the remedy of moving the High Court under Section 482 of CRPC was still available to him. So that was one thing which was said by the Supreme Court, and the court had also rejected Sisodia's arguments that he had a right against self-incrimination. So what is an individual's right against self-incrimination? So it has its origin in the Roman law and it evolved as a distinct right in the English jurisprudence. So the Fifth Amendment in the United States Constitution, it says that no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself without due process of law, a right that is colloquially referred to as taking or pleading the fifth. And Article 20, Clause 3 in Part 3 of our Constitution, which is talking about the fundamental rights, it says that no person accused of any offense shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. So, the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty and the right to remain silent in an interrogation essentially flow from this constitutionally guaranteed right against self incrimination. And this right also ensures that police cannot coerce anyone to confess to a crime and obtain a conviction based on that confession. So, how does this right against self incrimination apply in the criminal cases? So, since the onus of proving the case against the accused beyond reasonable doubt is on the state, and a person cannot be compelled to testify against himself or share the information that might go against him in a trial. And in 1961, in the landmark judgment, of the State of Bombay versus Kathi Kalu Ogad, an 11-judge bench of the Supreme Court ruled that obtaining photographs, fingerprints, signatures, and thumb impressions would not violate the right against self-incrimination of an accused. So even there are certain reasonable restrictions, we can say, and the court distinguished to be a witness from a furnishing evidence. So even obtaining photographs, fingerprints, signatures, and thumb impressions are not part of the right against self-incrimination under Article 20. And it also said that it broadened the parameters of handwriting samples to include the voice samples, adding that this would not violate, again, the right against self-incrimination. So there have been different judgments. So we've talked about the Windsor framework. So basically, it has two crucial aspects, which is a green lane and a red lane system for goods and the storm on break. So you need to be aware these terms are related to which thing. So that can come up. So how to read Q3 growth data? So numbers suggest that while India's economy grew faster in the past 3 years than previously reported, it is rapidly losing its growth momentum. It is likely to slow down from 9.1% in financial year 2022 to under 6% in the upcoming financial year. So it is the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation which releases the economic growth data that is related to GDP, GVA, and these are basically called the second advanced estimates for the full year. So what are GDP and GVA, that is gross value added? So these both are the measures of India's economic growth, and GDP does this by adding up who spent how much, and it thus captures the demand in the economy. So this is one way of calculating GDP. Then the gross value added calculates the same national income from the supply side. So it adds up the value added in money terms by the different sectors of the economy. So this is the basic difference between GDP and GVA. And specifically talking about GDP, so there are four main heads under it. First is the private final consumption expenditure, or the money that is being spent by the people on goods and services for personal consumption. And this is the biggest contributor of GDP, accounting for almost 55 to 60% in case of India's GDP. So this should be like you need to be like retain this thing in your mind that India's GDP is majorly, or we can say more than 50% of it is coming from the private final consumption expenditure. Second component is the government final consumption expenditure, or the money that is being spent by the government towards its daily needs, and this accounts for 10% of the GDP. Third, we have the gross fixed capital formation, that we also known as the investment in the economy, and this accounts for 30 to 32% of the GDP. And lastly, we have the net exports and the imports. So net exports basically means exports minus the imports. So this is typically a negative impulse to the GDP, because in India we have more imports than the exports. So this is when we have basically more exports than imports, so that would be basically adding up to our GDP growth. But in India, since we have more amount of imports than the exports, so that is a negative driver to the GDP in case of India. So that's how like the formula has also been written. GDP and GVA, they are related as follows. So GDP is equal to gross value added plus the taxes that are levied by the governments on the products, subtract the subsidies from it, and basically obviously subsidies that are provided by the government on the products. So it is GVA plus the taxes levied by the government minus the subsidies that are provided by the government. So typically the absolute level of GDP is more than the absolute level of GVA, because we have taxes received are more than the subsidies that are spent by the government. So it is always, we are seeing that GDP would always be higher than GVA. So talking about the Q3 GDP estimates, the main growth impulse has come from the spending towards investment in the economy. At one level, this is heartening news, and increase in investments typically augurs well for sustaining an economy's growth momentum, because then we also talk about the multiplier effect of investment in the economy. So the most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. So again, this one is related to economy. We have taken up this thing already. So Supreme Court warning against renaming the places by abusing history and invoking it selectively is valuable and timely. So we even like had a look at what was the Supreme Court judgment regarding this. So the apex court, it concluded by reaffirming that the rule of law, secularism, and constitutionalism, and cautioning against bigotry. So its directive to abide by the principle of fraternity enshrined in the Constitution's preamble, and its words of caution against the abuse of history that must be heard. So, My India at 100 should be a beacon of change where every individual has a reasoning mind with scientific temperament and does not lose the sight of sensitivity and concern while utilizing all the freedoms, powers, and rights guaranteed to him or her as a citizen. And ultimately, it is the people who make the nation. And we are in talks with around 18 nations for 4G, 5G technology stack. So these are like basically some of the best countries in the world that are looking to adopt the stack. And this is a 4G, 5G stack, which is upgradable. What we have installed, that same device will be doing 5G also, and technology has to be tested. Then only we will move to the next thing. So that's why we are doing 4G first, and then we'll be going ahead with 5G. So this is a journey which is going to be very exciting to see. So Prime Minister, he basically, while addressing a post-budget webinar on unleashing the potential ease of living using the technology, the Prime Minister said that technology will help in ease of living of all sections of society, and it is already being leveraged to usher in a qualitative difference in the lives of citizens. And he also said that in the latest union budget, the center has tried to prioritize technology with a human touch. So Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, which is the regulator for the insurance sector, it orders the insurers to cover people with disabilities and AIDS. So launching basically these, it has issued the insurance companies to mandatorily launch a appropriate product offering health insurance cover for certain vulnerable sections of society, which would be persons with disabilities, persons afflicted with HIV and AIDS, and those with mental illness immediately. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari, and you will be also getting the PDF link in the description box. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share this video as much as possible.